For your ears only, for the week of May 20th, I'm David Alpern.
I'm Melissa Exelberth.
The original intent of the credit portfolio experiencing the losses was to hedge the company in a stressed credit environment. But in repositioning this portfolio, we ended up with a strategy that was flawed, complex, poorly conceived, poorly vetted, and poorly executed. This should never have happened. I can't justify it. Unfortunately, these mistakes were self-inflicted.
We will stop borrowing unfathomable sums of money we can't even imagine from foreign countries we're never even going to visit. I will work with you to make sure we put out this spending and borrowing fire.
The trading loss for which J.P. Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon apologized to shareholders last week, at least $2 billion and perhaps more than twice that in the end, now under multiple federal investigations, was also a double loss for likely Republican presidential candidate Mitt Romney. With Dimon often praised as the smartest of all investment managers, Romney's background in venture capitalism looked a little riskier for the still fragile U.S. economy. And new campaign finance reports show Romney's greatest support now comes from some of the same banking and financial giants who have worked so hard to scale back government oversight.
Romney also was embarrassed last week by reports that a full-scale anti-Obama smear campaign emphasizing his connection to controversial clergyman Jeremiah Wright was recently proposed to TD Ameritrade founder Joe Ricketts by a crew of GOP campaign veterans. Quote, exactly what John McCain wouldn't let us do 4 years ago, they wrote. Ricketts and Romney both had to publicly denounce it. Pulitzer Prize-winning Boston Globe investigative and political reporter Michael Rezendes looked into Romney's big money issues last week, and he's on the line now for your ears only. Michael, welcome to our program.
Hey, pleasure to be here.
Let's start with the numbers. How much money has Romney received from the financial sector, and which companies in particular?
Well, one thing I did was try to isolate out from the financial sector just the Wall Street banks. Typically, when people talk about the financial sector, they also include real estate and insurance. I wanted to just take a look at the Wall Street banks, and I found that the 5 largest donor groups to the Romney campaign are the following: Goldman Sachs, J.P. Morgan Chase, number 2, Bank of America, Morgan Stanley, Credit Suisse Group. So the top 5 donor groups, and by that I mean individuals who work for those banks and their families and the PACs that those banks have. The top 5 supporters to Romney are all Wall Street banks. By contrast, Barack Obama's top 5 donor groups are Microsoft, Google, a couple of big law firms, and people who work for the University of California, which is a bit of a statistical quirk here.
This is an about-face by big money compared with its campaign giving last time.
Yeah, it is an about-face. Barack Obama did enjoy a lot of banking support. As a matter of fact, at this point in the campaign 4 years ago, 4 out of his 5 top donor groups were all banks. And it's J.P. Morgan Chase was right up there. Goldman Sachs was number 1. So it is an about-face. There's no question about it.
Well, what are insiders saying about why Wall Street has turned on Obama? Not only policy factors you reported, but emotion as well.
Yeah, there are 2 things. I mean, one is the opposition to the Dodd-Frank bill, all the financial regulations that the administration is now trying to put in place to stop another fiscal collapse like the one we had in 2008. The banks object to a lot of that. But they also seem to be very sensitive about some of the rhetoric that the president and other Democrats have used to explain what happened in 2008. The banks feel that they've been vilified, and they're taking personal umbrage at it.
On the other hand, big money is hedging on the election much like it does on investing. Talk about its gifts to the Democratic National Committee.
Well, you know, the hedge is pretty small, I think. I mean, they are hedging somewhat, but unlike in 2008 when the banks were pretty sure that Barack Obama was going to win and they better get in on the ground floor of the administration, right now it looks like it's a close race. The banks are really upset. And so far, Barack Obama has collected some money from the banks through the Democratic National Committee, more than Romney. But I think we're going to see that advantage disappear, maybe even as early as Monday when we get new numbers from both campaigns. I think now that Mitt Romney is the presumptive nominee, a lot of bank money is going to start flowing into the Republican National Committee.
What do the political handicappers say about how the shame of Jamie Dimon affects Romney's argument that a business background like his own is just what the American economy needs?
Well, I think the insiders are saying that it makes Romney's argument a little bit more difficult because here we have supposedly one of the best managed banks in the country making a really colossal error in its investments. This could be a $4 billion loss. So I think it makes Romney's argument a little bit tougher. The question is, does this translate into the lives of the average voters? I mean, right now the damage from this trade is restricted to J.P. Morgan Chase. It hasn't really filtered down into the larger economy. So I think Romney's his task right now is a little bit more difficult. It's difficult for him to make his argument, but certainly not impossible.
The narrow lead in national preference polls has swung back and forth between Romney and Obama, 1 point one way, then 2 points the other way, then back again. So once again, it seems turnout will be the key. And one new survey shows 80% satisfaction with Obama among Democrats versus only 59% for Romney among Republicans. Does that suggest a difficult choice for Romney, whether to play more to his party's base versus independents and the swing voters?
Yeah, I think Romney's in a bit of a difficult position because he really needs to broaden his support both among voters, but also among donors. Most of his donors are people who've maxed out. They're wealthy people. So he needs to find a way to motivate the Republican base, which is still distrustful of him, while reaching out to the broad middle. And that's a very difficult thing to do. Barack Obama has also a problem in inspiring his base. A lot of his people are not happy with him. They don't think he's gone far enough. So I think both candidates are struggling to motivate their base a little bit.
On balance, do you think the aborted GOP smear campaign really backfired on the party, or did it get its message out in free media coverage like ours right now?
Well, I don't think Mitt Romney wanted this to get out at all, and doesn't think it's a good thing. I think probably the net effect, if there is a net effect, would probably be to motivate Barack Obama's base by making them very angry that this kind of a thing could be seriously considered. So I'd say advantage Obama, but not by a great deal.
And how do you think the embarrassment of Chase affects the big money fight against regulation, continuing to try to prevent additional and undermine what's been passed?
Well, here I think the advantage clearly goes to the Democrats because we're not talking about how voters are going to perceive this. We're talking about people who are inside, who are the regulators, and people who are inside the banks, people who really have a lot of knowledge about these complicated matters. And I think it does make it very, very difficult for the banks to continue to oppose some of these regulations, like the Volcker rule, for instance. I think it makes it a much tougher task for the banks to argue that they don't need these regulations.
Michael Rezendes is a Pulitzer Prize-winning Boston Globe investigative and political reporter.
Quote from the news, by just about any measure, a great company. That doesn't mean it will be a great investment. That was University of Florida finance professor Jay Ritter on the initial public offering of Facebook, which opened at $38 a share but gained only 23 cents, despite safety net purchases by its own underwriters. Congress, meanwhile, took up legislation that would prevent Facebook co-founder Eduardo Saverin from ever revisiting the U.S. since he renounced his citizenship, potentially evading up to $67 million in taxes following the IPO.
Next, our Afghan diary as NATO considers what's next. For your ears only.